It's Sunday, and it's really nice out. It's too nice. What's going on?
Let's hear.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio. You know, it's. I'm not complaining at all. We've had like several punishing days and like really like oppressive heat level days this summer, and I guess my expectations for September are different.
How so?
I just thought it would be, you know, more oppressively hot than it is. Like more humid, but it's not. It's actually really nice right now. And so I've got a picture, big picture of the United States up on Windy. And we're just getting a bunch of weather from up north. We're getting a lot of cool air that's just pumping down over. I gotta find a better map. Yeah, Hudson Bay. It's just funneling cool, wet air from Hudson Bay right down over across Canada into the Midwest. And some of it's pumping right into Kansas, it looks like. But it's all just going straight south across the Midwest. It's quite glorious, I think.
Well, there's about to be more flooding on the East Coast
Yeah,
from the hurricane.
yeah.
Um, so that's where I'm like, the weather events that
That's
have
why I mean something's
happened
up.
that
Like they're
are,
too nice. Something's about to happen. We're about to get some really crazy weather here in the next week. I'm serious. I can
well,
like almost feel it in my joints type thing. My weather knees kicking in, guys.
yeah, I can definitely see if we get some like tornado ish or just like really strong winds
Yeah,
that aren't even necessarily like a tornado, but 50, 60 mile per hour winds are damaging when the structures aren't sound. Um, and I think that's one of the big problems is a lot of these areas that get hit have whether whether it's like a residence or a commercial building that is not structurally sound, that shit becomes debris really quickly and then it starts impacting everything else. So it's like
or
you
literally
can have a
impacting.
yeah, exactly. You can have a structurally sound building, but your windows are going to get broken if there's like a bunch of debris flying. So that's where it's like, between the flooding and the debris, um, I've been watching a lot of these weather event videos, of the different variety. And flooding has this weird dynamic of like the water goes away, so it kind of makes you think that like, oh, flooding is one of these things that, as long as you stay above the water line, shit's mostly okay, but it really, really can fuck with, you know, foundations and move a lot of land, um, landslides. There's like all these extra other things that come with flooding that um the East Coast and Florida aren't really ready for. So I'm like, at this point, it feels so obvious that we should have um like disaster response in terms of like FEMA is like really, it shouldn't always be like emergency response in terms of like there's different, every disaster isn't like state state emergency like level shit. So it's, if there was
The Federal Weather Response Agency. We just made it up. Um,
right,
they would be responsible for all of the activities of FEMA, except they wouldn't have this name that implies, oh, we're here, the emergency crew, because these things are just kind of fact of life.
right, like there's tornado season, so it's like, you
It's
know
not like it's not going to happen next year and then
hurricane
happen again.
season, exactly. So when we know that these things are like annual events and the frequency is unpredictable, the location's unpredictable. There's times when there's been hurricanes on both coasts where it's like a hurricane was on both coasts at the same time. So there's there's a clear impetus to sort of establish this mid-level response that's not like firefighters locally or emergency response that's local, that's like a national service that can be deployed nationally. But like I have no idea where that's even, if that's even in the political discourse, in terms of the things that political discourse is focused on right now are so myopic in terms of like long-term existence, even though some of the stuff is like very specific to segments of society that then are at like constant risk of threat of to their existence and their livelihood and their lives, literally. That's not dismissing that part of the um specificity of the political discourse, but in terms of like, if humanity is on a course where it's looking to extinguish itself as an entire species, having the political discourse focus on things that are of the time and not the long-term issues, like climate change is definitely one of those long-term issues. Military industrial is definitely one of those long-term issues. um resist Capacity to react and respond to the effects of climate change is a long-term issue. Everything else is basically, it's not frivolous by any means, but it's like none of it matters if we all die in a flood. If there's like an actual flood to the tune of what the Bible is intending to portray in its depiction of a flood, and like whatever happens and causes a bunch of icebergs to melt all at once, or glaciers, and then it actually like floods and like billions of people die all at once. Well, it doesn't fucking matter what pronouns we were using at that point if people were respecting pronouns. So that's where I'm like, on the one hand, I'm not trying to like dismiss issues that affect people in their individuality, but that shit is actually uh irrelevant to history if we don't avert the avoidable disasters that come with military industrial exploitation and fossil fuel dependency and inability to break away from those things in terms of like getting humanity on a like more sustainable existence where we're not just like burning things and like inhaling the particulates from the things we just burnt as if that's not how our ecosystem works. So like, on the one hand, I don't blame people who didn't understand that when they burned like anything, that it went up into the atmosphere and then they were gonna be breathing that shit that they burned. Like when you didn't understand that, you can't really blame them for like making London into an unlivable, polluted shithole in the industrial age when like people were literally dying from fog because it was like some areas were so polluted that the air like the fog would settle and it wouldn't have enough oxygen in it for them to breathe. So there's like a literal fog that killed people from pollution. Can't really blame those people because they were too fucking stupid to know better.
Well, they were also
Even though it
dumping
makes that,
buckets of piss and shit into their water supply.
again, too stupid to know better. So you can't really blame them all that much. Once we know that, like,
I think the guy that figured it
it's
out
kind of
was like
obvious. It
walking
seems
down an alley and a
obvious.
bucket of shit landed on him. I'm pretty sure that's how that works.
Well, I mean, at the same time, when you have running water in the form of a river, you would think that oh, you can like throw shit in it and it's gonna go somewhere. Well, it's gonna settle somewhere eventually. And people like when they can't put two and two together, like I'm not gonna blame them for not understanding the mathematic outcome of their actions to a certain degree.
Trying to
It's like
explain
if you
statistics to somebody who doesn't understand that shitting in the water supply is a bad idea. That's
right, I mean, and again, it's like if somebody gets dysentery because they're down fucking river from somebody shitting, you you can blame them if they know what they're doing. But when they don't know what they're doing, it's kind of disingenuous to like put the blame on them. Excuse me. So that's where like when humanity was like polluting that way, I'm not gonna retroactively like make it seem like they knew what they were doing because they kind of didn't. It's not the same as like slavery or some shit like that where you're like, oh, you know you're doing wrong. You know this shit is wrong and you're just trying to find ways to justify it. There's like certain things where there is a line being crossed because there's knowledge of the thing being done as unethical or morally wrong. And that's where like pollution is one of those gray areas because like even up until the early 80s, people didn't really understand that like throwing stuff out, like throwing trash out their window was bad. They just like, oh, it'll go somewhere eventually. And like, it sounds fucking stupid now to say it like that, obviously. But
I mean,
when
literally
you,
goes somewhere, but
right, but when you don't understand biodegradable,
yeah.
like, or what that even means, or like the difference between styrofoam and foil and like recycled paper, eh, or like the ink that's printed on those things and how that affects the food you ate that was packaged in those things. You know, there's a level of access to information and understanding of the information was not really at a place, like I said, even to the early 80s where they just really didn't comprehend how terrible they were treating the planet and the implications that would have on human existence in the far or near future. So like I think this also comes with in terms of creativity. There's a creativity that like you see in science fiction in terms of the capacity to extrapolate into the future. So in the science fiction like universe of Foundation, it would be like psychohistory in terms of if you look at all of the things in the past and extrapolate, there is a pattern that should emerge when there is uh logic or some sort of intention behind what's happening. It's not like this the concept of that as like a fictional way to the way that we use like regression analysis is not as fantastic in as psychohistory in terms of like we know the limits of extrapolation, but even further, it's been wrong so many times that like it's not really even trusted all that much. You do it just to understand the possibilities, but shit happens that throws off your extrapolations that and unless your extrapolation has um, correctly identified the outlier that's going to affect your data. For example, like when people were talking in 2021 about what's going to happen next in the stock market and shit, the AI boom hype train hadn't happened. So there's all these speculations that now sound fucking ridiculous because the AI boom happened and now we're like riding through that hype train. And it's funny to see the crypto hype train effectively recede into the sand. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like crypto's died just all at once. And there's still semblance of institutions trying to like hold on to the crypto boom, but it was never meant to be front end technology, let alone the way people were trying to frame it. But now that it's actually moving to back end technology where any place where it could have actually been useful, the experimental places where it's definitely not useful have been identified. So people are like, oh, we're not really going to be using blockchain technology in supply chains that have very perishable items or things that are going to be destroyed when they're sold, like fruits and vegetables. Something like clothing, it makes more sense to have like, oh, a Louis Vuitton blockchain proven item. So if you resell a purse or a t-shirt or whatever, if you go and check, you can prove that it was um, created at the factory forever, whatever the goal. There's certain items that aren't going to be destroyed as soon as they're sold or don't have the intention of being destroyed. Um, Blockchain with food items or like smoking items is fucking stupid. It always was. There was never anything that made sense to have like a blockchain associated with it. Um, so to a certain extent, there are actual use cases for blockchain, but and then even then cryptocurrency has probably even fewer use cases than blockchain. So the combination of the two is a really low intersection of actual use cases. Um, if especially if we're talking about legal things. So it took it took over a decade, slightly over a decade to get through all of the bullshit use cases in blockchain to a point where now we're finally getting to where it's useful and like where all the other stuff is obviously hype. So I sincerely doubt it's going to take that long for AI because um, our cycles are moving faster as far as like commerce and the intersection of testing technology and commerce. But it's never been as fast as I think people thought it was in their heads. It's actually moved fairly slowly. So like for blockchain technology to take that long to cycle through, that to me indicates that there were a lot of use cases being examined, and then in the process it's like once a use case has been identified and it doesn't work really well, people don't really go back to it that much. They're not going to be dumping a ton of money into it because a lot of times the failure was fantastic or at a scale where so a good example actually is not in I won't point at the blockchain, I'll point at Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos when they were trying to claim that they effectively came up with like a tricorder that could take a drop of blood and identify tens, if not hundreds, of different problems from that drop of blood. A lot of people in the industry call bullshit because certain tests you need a certain volume just to get enough like of the sample to validate what you're testing for in the first place. So like a drop just isn't going to be enough for certain things. So like that's one of the reasons they were calling bullshit, but the technology was in a place where the speed and the volume of blood necessary to get results was just unbelievable for so many people in the field that when they were trying to call bullshit, the issue became that the investors didn't understand what the doctors were saying to call bullshit to know enough to understand what they were saying was true. So they were basically looking at the doctors calling bullshit and basically saying, "Oh, they're just haters. They don't appreciate tech bros coming in and doing things that they couldn't figure out how to do in the last 100 years." Well, turns out they couldn't. Tech bros couldn't fucking figure out how to do it either. But there was like a 10-year period where they were blowing smoke up each other's asses, looking at fake data, thinking that they had solved problems that doctors hadn't, and that's or doctors couldn't, and that they thought that briefly that they were smarter than the actual medical doctors that work on these things and the bioengineers that actually work on solving these problems. And they thought they just came in and hacked some fucking algorithm and figured it out. And to this day, just based on Elizabeth Holmes's statements, it's like unclear whether she really believed it or not. Because she just could be super delusional, but it never worked. So, in all that, there are periods in which things can be portrayed as like solutions to problems, but not be working. And the market can be testing them. And it can look like that shit is coming in. Like right now, it looks like AI is going to come in and just take over everything. But that's not how the shit worked out with Theranos. That's not how this shit worked out with blockchain. That's not how this shit worked out with fucking um really with Facebook, really with Twitter, really with Google, because at the end of the day, they kept having to acquire new properties to sustain their growth models because everything that they had built before started running out, which is why Google got into gaming and failed, and they got into fucking
Oh yeah,
social media and
what was it, the
failed.
Stadia?
Stadia. Yeah, people, it's easy to forget these big companies' failures because they've had certain successes. And then when you look at their actual successes, you're like, wait a minute. Okay, for example, Twitter. Twitter only started becoming profitable after like a decade, and it only had a couple profitable years. Then it was sold at a ridiculously overpriced amount. So right now, there's no fucking way in hell that it's producing enough profit to sustain the cost necessary to make it worth the acquisition price at which it was bought, but nobody's talking about it because it's such a huge failure that it's like it's going to make you sound like a hater just to discuss it because it's such a huge failure. And what's funny to me is like Elon's had so many failures in the last 2 years that like I think people have just stopped talking about him because it's just going to make you sound like you're beating a dead horse at this point. Like, remember when they tried to bring out Optimus Prime and like, oh, we're going to fucking revolutionize robotics, even though we're just jumping in where Boston Dynamics has been doing this shit for 20 years. We're going to come in and fucking kick over the fucking expectations and we're going to outdo Boston Dynamics in our first model. No, no, that's not what happened at all. It fucking was an embarrassment. and nobody's talking about it anymore. It's like that shit didn't even happen because he's had so many failures at this point. Like Emperor not having clothes is not. We're way beyond that. I don't even know what level of fall from grace he's at this point because just 3 years ago, he was not only considered the smartest man on the planet, but people were like looking to him like Harry Seldon in fucking Foundation. Oh, he's the prophet of the future. He's gonna bring humanity into the next age of fucking progression. No, no, not this motherfucker. So to go from that, people were like fawning over this man's every eye twitch, not even his words. If this man's eye looked in a different, oh my god, he's thinking, Elon's thinking, let him think. Shh, don't interrupt him thinking. He's gonna say something that's gonna change the course of humanity. That's actually what the shit was like people act like the entire world wasn't like that and it was only the Elon stands. No, everybody, fucking Time magazine, CBS, I don't give a fuck who it was. They were all gonna MCU. He's in Iron Man 2. This motherfucker Tony Stark asking Elon Musk for fuck this shit, man. This is like to me the funniest. There's so much proof that everybody thought this motherfucker was the smartest person in the history of humanity. Now we know not only is that untrue, it might even be the exact opposite in terms of like, I think the funniest part to me, like the funniest part of him starting to lose his intellectual prowess facade wasn't anything to do with like any technology that he claimed to create or just bought his way into making it seem like he created. It was when he was playing Elden Ring and he posted his build and people who had been playing Elden Ring were like, what the fuck is this? This makes no fucking sense. Maybe he knows something we don't. And then he would like talk about his build or whatever. I never played Elden Ring, so I don't really understand what was like. I looked at it and it didn't look like it made a whole lot of sense because he was like heavy on healing or something, but there was like no weapons. So it made it seem like he didn't really know what he was doing because there's nothing about the build that made sense. Um, but
What kind of game is this?
that's really when people like nerds, not regular people, but like actual nerds who were giving him the benefit of the doubt most of the time, who weren't like his stands. That's when they really started questioning a lot of the shit he was saying in terms of like all the specialists always question everything he's been saying. So if you go back and look at things like
Oh, this is like a Dungeons and Dragons game.
yeah. Um if you go back and look at things like Hyperloop, anytime he's like associating himself with something new, all the specialists will usually come out and basically debunk everything he says in public in ways that regular people can't understand. So they don't know who's who or who's right. So they assume that Elon's right because he was a billionaire. And that's always like, oh, well, I don't know this other guy. He can't be fucking, he's Elon's probably right because Elon's always right because he's a billionaire. And this was like the logic that a lot of lay people would like keep falling into. It's obviously a logical fallacy, but if you look at people like Steve Jobs or like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or like
Even Jimmy
what's his
Buffett.
name? No, not him, but like Richard Branson, because Jimmy Buffett's had massive failures. His Margaritaville failed massively. Everybody saw that. So when you have a massive failure that basically breaks you, it's like when Planet Hollywood broke Sylvester Stallone and Arnold, everybody was like, "Oh, you guys aren't like billionaires. You can get close to being broke." And that puts them in a different status than like Oprah, because Oprah can fail and she's still going to be rich as fuck. Bill Gates can fail, he's still going to be rich as fuck. So there's like in people's minds, you can't really put a number on it, but you can put something on the, like Chris Rock had a bit about the difference between rich and wealthy. Like wealthy people pay rich people's checks, and that's like no more apparent in something than like the NBA or the NFL. It's like, yeah, NBA basketball players are rich, but somebody's writing a full basketball team's worth of those checks. That motherfucker is wealthy. So there's a difference. And it's like, again, you can't really put a number on it because there's going, like, inflation's going to change that number constantly, but there's going to be people who inflation just can't even touch because their families have been robbing people for generations, or like doing something illegal, because you don't get that way
Yeah, the ultra
ethically. That
wealthy who
Yeah,
make money just
nobody
by
ever got there
breathing.
ethically. Nobody, not one of those families, not one of those oligarchs, none of them. So it's never through anything ethical. Nobody can prove that uh prove that wrong because it's impossible. So like um anytime you see this insane wealth, there was literally always some exploitation. Because even Bill Gates, his family was already rich. Bill Gates was already rich before, or they were already wealthy before Bill Gates like did his whole thing and became like his own um entity. Because Big Bill Gates was apparently like a 6'5" man that would go in and like bully people around in business deals, and like was apparently a huge dick, but because he was so physically imposing, would be in these like business business deals, like effectively being that person, that exaggerated like machismo focused um business person, but like in real life. And Bill Gates had to get out of his shadow. The only reason we don't know about his dad as like more of an entity is because Bill Gates just made more money effectively, and so he did get out of his dad's shadow. But it still wasn't doing anything ethical. There was a whole bunch of unethical IP acquisition and um, you know, misrepresentation of ownership and a bunch of shit that he did along the way. It wasn't ethical either. It wasn't like the worst thing. Like I don't think at any time did Microsoft use like child labor directly, but then you get into like, oh well, if their supply chain uses child labor, then it's like they know what the fuck's happening indirectly. So it's like it, this is not to get into the good place. Nothing's ethical in modern capitalism. Well, that part is like there's no ethical consumption in modern capitalism. That's kind of true, but everything isn't consumption. Act, like every action doesn't come with consumption, so that's not all that people's ethics are based on. So if you reduce it to like
So, do you think?
ethically consuming, then yeah, you can only be unethical, but that's not all people's existence is. Sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. So, do you think that like the way people build their tunes in games, somehow reflect the personality of the player, of the like to some extent?
Definitely, definitely. I
So
mean,
he built a mage, but put heavy armor on them and gave them two swords in one hand and two shields in the other.
what?
Yeah, he can't cast spells and attack with weapons at the same time because his staff hand is also his sword hand because mage.
What?
He has let's see, he has talismans that give him increased vigor,
So
endurance,
does he have
strength, and
four hands?
dexterity, but at the cost of taking 15% more damage during when he gets struck. So apparently it's a bad talisman for a casting character because it benefits physical weapons but not casters. See, here's
Does the
a
character have four arms?
no. He wears a crimson amber medallion, which boosts HP to offset the other one's negative effects, and a green turtle talisman, which boosts stamina recovery. But that's better. Apparently, that's better suited for like physical characters who have more frequent rolls and use weapons. But because his character is a caster, he's supposed to use a staff and mutter shit and wave it around and make flashy lights on screen. He's holding swords and a shield and wearing heavy armor.
Wow, so it's like he didn't understand his own class.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
he
pretty
selected
crazy.
a class and decided to do something else. It's like an a born sorcerer who is like destined to be a sorcerer. Is like, yeah, I'm gonna go join the knights, guys. I'm gonna be a ranger. Wait, what?
Wow. Huh. That's
In
interesting.
Eve, it would have been like buying a freighter and then equipping it with weapons and taking it into a skirmish zone,
Yeah.
and not even a good one, like a level one freighter that can't even do cool shit like put a cloaking device on.
So on the one hand, like I don't give him the benefit of the doubt on that because it sounds utterly ridiculous. So there's things like I'm playing Starfield currently and like you can allocate resources or skill points to different classes and it's like if you're gonna fly around in your ship a lot, you wouldn't allocate your resources not to piloting. So like that type of character development applies across almost all the
Yeah, yeah.
RPG type things. So if your character is inconsistent with your class, the game is going to be more it's going to be unnecessarily difficult.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's times when you can do that to like your benefit, but it doesn't sound like he was doing it to his benefit. So that's
So
where
I have a Star
I
Trek.
don't
I have a Star Trek Online character that's a science officer, and that tune's really like high leveled out, just built, and I've got a cruiser that has, instead of loading out my engineering or tactical or science modules with modules that provide a meager boost to shields or this or that or something else, I just loaded up with special weapons like exotic weapons, and I rely on the boost that's the buff that's given from using like a set like of engineering type stuff of warp core and impulse engines and shield generator and that kind of stuff. And so my ship generally doesn't get destroyed. It just flies around and makes bright lights. And I've kind of rolled with that, went with that because as the science officer, there are like bonuses to using exotic weapons in space. And so I kind of have what's described as a glass cannon, but because of the bonuses of using complete sets of just stuff, like my shields regenerate really quickly, and because of other like character buffs, the there are like bonuses to hull regeneration that come naturally with, I guess, being a science officer. So there's and I read a lot before I started doing that to that character. That was like my second character actually. The first one I just kind of stopped about maybe 5 hours into the game because I realized I was building it all wrong and I had no idea what I was doing. But once I built the second character and it started doing all of the things right, all of a sudden the game opened up and it was like, oh, this is actually really easy. Like this is like not just easy but like fun.
Yeah, it's weird how that works. It's like a game can be the worst thing in the world, and you get one piece of equipment, and suddenly it's easy. And I'm playing a game that happened to me. Um, I'm playing it on very like the hardest level, but once I got the right equipment, then I didn't die nearly as quickly, and it was like, oh, it started to feel like, is this piece of equipment too strong and it does it make the game too easy? But then some shit would happen and it would like remind me, no, this game is still on very hard. So it's like I think there's a balance where there needs to be some things like that that make the player character have the capacity to feel powerful but not overpowered, because if you feel overpowered then it starts to not be fun
Yeah.
because there's no stakes anymore. And I think that's like one of the problems with like I I don't know, at some point I realized this. I think it was SimCity 2000, like long ago, when you turn on God mode, it just this there's no more stakes and then it's no more fun.
Well,
And
God mode was fun because then you could like unleash all manner of like, you know, tornadoes and
it's fun for a bit, but then it loses its novelty, and then
well,
you
yeah.
realize like, oh shit, if there's no capacity for the townspeople to die, then I don't know what I'm doing here. So there's nothing for me to overcome. And that's where like I remember it was like it must have been like 96 or something. I don't remember exactly when that game came out, but obviously you would think it was 2000, but I think it was before. I'm pretty sure it
No,
was
that exact
96.
same thing happened to me with
Um,
Fallout Shelter, where I built such a robust vault with like my first six, no, my first three rooms, four rooms were dudes with power suits, and then the next four rooms were all dudes with institute lasers and like battle armor, like, you know, the good stuff. and and then after that, like, and all every floor had a Mr. Handy because I'd gone on enough quests that I had arrived at a full vault of Mr. Handies. And at that point, the game was just waiting for the daily or weekly quest, and I decided, yeah, I don't care enough about this. This thing doesn't. Nobody dies when death claws attack. When there's a fire, there are enough people around that fires get put out like almost immediately. I have 200 dwellers. Can't have any more than 200 dwellers. Um, at that point, it's not really a game anymore. It's just maintenance.
yeah, that's kind of how I got with No Man's Sky. So I don't know if you've ever played that. But it when it first came out, the game was apparently way different and it wasn't actually a complete game. Whereas now it's got an actual game, like with, a storyline, and there's missions and there's NPCs and there's a ton of characters, and you can go on missions with other people. So you like encounter other people in the universe. So there's a lot of things now that No Man's Sky does that it didn't do at the beginning, where I think I put like 125 hours into it, and it was like after a while it just felt like, okay, I'm just grinding for nothing because there's no more ultimate goal, and it lost any sort of motivating factor. um and it's like some of those games you don't need, if you're there for the exploration. I think for me, probably 60 hours of it was even just exploring. I didn't need like a plot to carry me through. um but there's like collecting, exploring, socializing, and then just combat. So or like activity. So there's different things a game can bring when it's like one of those open world experiences. Um, and if any of those start lacking, then it starts losing its draw or any sort of semblance of fun. And that's where like No Man's Sky, I feel like you can get a good 125 hours out of it, and it's just not fun anymore. And it's like trying to juice a stone, but I'm sure you can enjoy it, but it's not the same type of fun where like um man, something like riding in a go-kart when you're that close to the ground, that shit just never gets old. So like or like radio controlled cars where you're like doing that shit for 30 years and it just doesn't get old in terms of like um certain things have fun uh re-experience value in ways that like others don't. And like I feel like fighting games have some of the highest replay value for sort of some of the shortest experiences, which is wild in terms of like a lot of matches don't last more than 3 minutes at a time. Um, so the idea in reality, every individual match is basically playing that game over again. So when somebody's done like thousands of matches in a fighting game, if you look at those individual matches, it's like every time the fight starts over, that's actually them continuing, but in terms of like that's a new match. That's really another replay of that game. It's just an unbroken replay. Um, and the sessions end up adding, you may replay like if you're playing Street Fighter, effectively every time you fight a new match, that's you playing the game again, but your skill has accrued and your experience has accrued in a way that doesn't make it feel like oh, this is me going back to Street Fighter again. But that's exactly what it is. So in a way, I think there's this really like high replay, low time investment. I don't know if it's a trade off, but it seems like um, the easier it is to have those short sessions, almost the more likely it is that people are going to stay engaged with those types of games over time. Because it's like the more something demands time from you, it's going to feel more of a slight when it doesn't pay off the way you expected. And then that's going to feel like No Man's Sky's ending was whack. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible, but when you put a bunch of time into it and then it's just like that's it. Okay. Um Same shit with Mass Effect series. Um I definitely wasn't the only person. Everybody was mad in terms of like what was promised as far as your actions meaning something. And then once they actually got there, it was way more difficult than they realized um, how to implement that. And the same shit happened with Fable. So I think there's this ironic difficulty to deliver an ending that's worth a really long time investment. And I don't know how big of an explosion it's gonna have to be. Like, when Thanos did the snap, people knew it wiped out half the universe. So it's like you didn't have to see every half of every being dying in the universe. It just had to show you enough of the ones you knew, and then it hit what it meant. And then that's where like the scale of that was enough to pay off the time investment of the 26 movies you had watched up until that, or however many the fuck it was, to get to that point for it to make sense as to what happened. Because it wasn't, you didn't just watch the Avengers movie. You had to really watch all those fucking movies to
God,
truly understand the scale of the
there are
scope of what had
32 of them at
happened.
this point.
That's too many.
32 with 11
There's
more in various stages of development.
That's why Love and Thunder ending sucked, because it's not just the ending to Love and Thunder. When people are going to end, like, that's where I think MCU fucked itself in the later stages of, like, when you go into She-Hulk, you're not just
Which way?
watching
Which one was?
She-Hulk.
Oh, that was the one where Natalie Portman was Thor. Oh, that one was terrible. I totally wiped that out of my memory.
And the issue becomes these properties want to stand alone, but this late they can't. They have no choice but to be another ending in that sequence. Like, if you're like the 32nd property, 33rd property, this is like the ending of your show or the ending of your movie. Well, that's the ending of everything so far. And if it doesn't build up to like what people expect after putting in 60, 70, 80, probably 100, over 100 plus hours at this point, if you've watched all of the side television shows, um it's not, there's like damn near only a couple things they can do left to make it actually hit the scale ending of that many movies. And like Living Tribunal is going to have to be brought in, and that's going to happen at some point probably. Who else can they bring in? Galactus is going to come in at some point. Dormammu's probably going to come back. There's only a few entities they have left to go to that scale and do the cosmic, like they can do the Dark Phoenix shit, the Phoenix Force. Um but they can't do them every movie, and they have to build to them. So that's where like the Kang shit is, it's such a slow build that every time they have Kang at the ending of something, it's like, oh, that was kind of lackluster, anticlimactic. So I'm like playing the Starfield game now, where I'm like, I feel like they're gonna deliver an ending, but I don't want to. Then expectations are weird in terms of you don't want them to be.
81 fucking titles. 81.
Yeah, that's a lot.
You got to watch
That's a lot.
81 titles to be up to speed, and some of them are shorts, but some of them are 2.5 hour long in movies.
Well, because it's just like, okay, Iron Man 3, for
Oh,
example. Iron Man 3 doesn't really make sense without watching the shorts,
yeah.
because the shorts are supplemental material that really makes it make sense finally. So that's where you're like, oh, this is a stupid fucking 14-minute piece that didn't come with the actual film. Um, I needed to watch that for this to make any sort of sense. So it is almost like the obscurity of the niche pieces that you need to watch to understand the entire picture is also at the same time so mundane and doesn't pay anything off, that it's like you end up hating yourself for wasting your time doing it. Cause then that's where like all the people who wasted their time trying to figure out what the fucking background shit meant in Guardians of the Galaxy or in Thor 2 or whatever. Guess what? None of that shit fucking meant anything in the long run because somebody like James Gunn would just come in and say none of that shit was applicable in my story. So then that story is disconnected and they try to do that for that one. And then it doesn't work because he didn't have any sort of
Oh man, I
in,
was wrong.
intention.
I had an incomplete list. There are 105 titles in the MCU, shorts and full-length movies.
That's too many. That's too fucking
105
many.
entries in the MCU. What the?
I never thought I'd say that that's they have too many. It's impossible to keep up.
Well, it's scary as I've seen a significant portion of this list. No, there's definitely things on this list that I watched like 5 minutes of and said no thank you. Like Moon Knight. I did not watch Moon Knight. I watched all of She-Hulk. Uh, I did not know Miss Marvel was released at all. Um, I didn't know Peter had a to-do list, a 3-minute short. I'm not gonna watch that. What else? Eternals was terrible. I wish I hadn't watched that. Falcon and Winter Soldier did not feel like 300 minutes. WandaVision did not feel like 350 minutes. What If was really fun though. Bunch of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. specials.
Well, then Agents of Shield, only for it not to be canon.
Oh, that's such a fucking like ball tap of ball taps right there.
So yeah, there's like things like that where,
Way to create a bunch of shit and then get punched in the dick in the last mile.
well, because I feel like then tried to make Inhumans partially canon by bringing Black Bolt back for Multiverse of Madness, but it's like I don't know for sure. I after watching Strange New Worlds, I'm tempted to go back and watch Inhumans, which is where it also makes me wonder, do people's good acting in the future make their past acting retroactively better? Because I'm like,
Hmm.
Anson Mount was in
Inhuman.
Lost briefly,
Yeah.
just for like a scene where you're like, oh, I don't understand why they didn't
I mean, the dude
bring
was
him into
in.
the main cast because clearly he's a good actor, but at the time maybe he just wasn't that good. But it seems like good enough now. But that's what I'm wondering
He was in
if
Crossroads
people.
back in 2002 with Britney Spears.
That's funny.
I think he's really good in Star Trek. I think he's well suited to TV Pike. I like him more as Pike than I liked Kelvin Pike.
Was he in Jupiter's Legacy? Hold on.
Not seeing it.
Everybody wore beards, so I forget. Oh, that was Josh Duhamel. Yeah.
Everyone wore beards. It sounds like the name of a rock band.
Well, they were really fake. That's why it was so weird because it was like obviously fake beards. Where I'm like, man, this is a lot in 2021 for these beards to be this fake, and y'all, I guess I'll suspend disbelief that this man grew this beard. Bad facial hair is like really hard to suspend disbelief with. Um, I think that it's more difficult with bad facial hair than
Oh
like a bad
man.
wig.
Sometimes when the facial hair is super sculpted, it's hard to take seriously too.
Hmm.
Like the ones that are so heavily manicured that they've got like you know it, it's like when it's one thing to have like really crazy stuff like carved into the side of the hair on the side of the head and like that stuff I've always thought was really interesting like when there was some kind of like a concentrated effort to give the haircut its own kind of thing. But when it got to the face and it starts to look more like someone drew it on with like a Sharpie because the lines are so perfect.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they are drawn on too,
Oh man.
or spray painted.
Like sprayed on with like that Ronco hair in a
Yeah.
can stuff.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of barbers doing that shit in terms of they'll do it with hairlines too, um, which is really funny. Like the hair in a can.
It's like the hair version of spray cheese.
Right, pretty much.
Oh.
Just give it up at that point.
Oh man. Yeah, we only have our telomeres are only so long. We're only going to get to enjoy hair as long as those telomeres allow for it. Until science, decodes the whole like how to extend telomeres and keep people young forever thing, which may happen, but might only happen for a few people. Um, but yeah, we only get to have glorious hair for a short period of time, and so we celebrate it. And when we can't, then it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna fight it. If it happens, it happens. If not, then I'm gonna celebrate it. But man, I've known some people who had receding hairlines like in high school, like real serious receding
Yeah,
hairlines in
it
high
starts to
school.
hit some people pretty early. I mean, if it's genetic,
That's the way it is.
that shit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know a few people. It was like middle school. This shit was already starting to get thin, and then in like junior senior year, it was definitely you could see their scalp.
Yeah. One of the
And they
people I
still had
know
a
though,
hairline, but it was definitely like thinner than it was a few years before. So.
yeah, like one of those people that I know, he's like, got the thickest facial hair and like, hair on his back type situation. And his joke is that his hair ran out of steam once it got up to his face. So
I
he
mean,
rolls with it.
that's the case with a lot of those, and it's like very crazy in terms of the consistency of the testosterone levels being a certain way, and like the body hair being a certain way, but the male pattern baldness being, you know, it's called male pattern because it hits the top of the head and the hairline specifically. Like that's not the only places people go bald, but that's the one I think in people's minds most frequently because that's the one most associated with male pattern baldness. Um, but it's like, you see people go bald in like the sides or the back or like um body hair, it's like, but that's also other shit. So like my my legs are like they don't grow hair near where the socks have basically rubbed the follicles down, which is where it's not the entire leg, but you can definitely notice that hair just doesn't grow in a certain part of my leg anymore or on certain either one. Um, which is also where to me sometimes I feel like people's male pattern baldness is from their hats. And their follicles not being able to breathe. But I've I've seen a bunch of stuff that says that's not true. But I've also seen a bunch of people wearing hats and going bald. So I'm like, I'm not gonna discount my experience, even though there's like no real hard data to confirm it. I'm gonna acknowledge that there's no hard data, but I'm gonna hold that belief
I wonder how many people have
regardless.
neckbeard because they put Rogaine on their face and it dripped down onto their neck. Because like anywhere
Do
that the
people
Rogaine
do
gets up,
that?
yeah.
Huh. That's a new one to me. I
Yeah,
guess like
like if
I
you aren't
guess you
apparently if you weren't careful when applying minoxidil, like if it gets out of the regions you want to restore your hair, um, it'll restore hair in those places.
oh
Yeah.
wow.
So
Huh.
so if not applied properly, it can run down the back of the scalp onto the neck and then onto someone's back, and then they would have like enhanced hair growth on their back and their neck.
But I guess
If it gets
I
anywhere,
never
it stimulates hair growth.
huh. I guess I never thought like of beard use or beard growth using that stuff. But at the same time, it doesn't it can't work on every bald head because it doesn't
No,
work on every
yeah,
bald head, which is where it's like,
they have to have hair follicles. They have to have a few. They just have to have like the structures to produce hair. But some
mm,
people those structures just stop working entirely.
yeah,
And I think there may actually be an environmental advantage in certain environments, like muggy but well shaded, like rainforest. I can see having no hair on top of one's head actually being kind of a good thing, but not in like an open arid region where there's all sunlight and no cloud cover or no trees. That would just burn the scalp. Like in
yeah, that
scenario.
happened to me once. And when I had short hair, I like walked around for a summer without any sort of head protection,
Ooh.
and my scalp was just cooked. That's like the only time I've ever had like sunburn, but it was on my fucking head. And so it was like when that shit started to peel, it was like it just looked like terrible dandruff, but it was an actual sunburn. It
Well,
was so fucking stupid.
I guess
Was it?
better to peel some skin because of a sunburn than to have like a giant horrible case of dandruff, which would imply like a terrible yeast infection on your
Oh
scalp.
yeah. Oh god. That that's like it was unfortunate to have it happen when it was like, especially when it was peeling. But it was definitely obvious that it wasn't dandruff because once it was over, it was over.
Yeah.
So um, it never became like a nickname or anything like that, which is like kids can be brutal, and if you get dandruff the wrong time, that's just gonna be your nickname for the rest of your
Well,
time. Those
until
people.
you go to a college in a completely different city in a different state, and
Right, but the people that knew you then are still gonna call you dandruff boy or whatever the fuck it
yeah, you
was.
just can
Like,
never go to any class reunions and never
yeah.
and cease all communication with anybody who knew that nickname and got to start over completely, and that's pretty tough for somebody who's fresh out of high school. But maybe not. I'm actually no. That's it's not entirely difficult. I knew plenty of people who just the second they could get out, they did, and they never looked back, and that's okay. I think that for a time there was this like dialogue about was it a wanderlust? Like some people have to wander around until they find their place, which I think is actually kind of a really strange way of saying I'm gonna go walk this way until I find something.
That sounds like white people problems.
Wanderlust. I don't know where I belong. I gotta go wander around till I find where I belong.
Man, it's so crazy to see like so many I won't even call them extreme sports, but like things that put people's lives at risk unnecessarily are it's like white people don't feel predatorial threat enough, so they got to go like jump out of planes or fucking bungee jump or like drive cars at 200 miles an hour in a fucking circle or some shit like that. And it's like everybody's there just to see the crash eventually. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, um, I stumbled upon the in like Alaska, they just like launch cars off of a fucking cliff
Oh,
at
they
it.
do that every year too.
Yeah, it's like an annual thing. But it's like the crowd of people gathers where they're like cheering to see if the car gets close to the crowd. And I'm like, oh, you want the car to jump off, like to be launched off the cliff and hit people and like freak, have the freak accident where it goes far enough and flips. That's what you're cheering for because every time it like got closer and closer to the fucking crowd, that's when they would cheer the most. And I'm like, this is some weird, we don't have enough fucking tigers eating us fucking, let's launch some cars at ourselves type shit where
Well, there's enough of them gathered in the group that no bear or moose is going to approach them. And that's like the most dangerous stuff in Alaska is grizzlies and moose. Actually, from what I understand, moose kill more people in Alaska per year than grizzlies or brown bear and black bear combined. Something like that. Which is strange to think that a giant deer is the most dangerous thing in Alaska.
but do you know how not in a place a human should be you have to be to get killed by a fucking moose? And that's what I mean. That's like some white people shit where I'm like, they will go thousands of miles, set up a goddamn settlement, and fucking live there and get killed by a moose and still keep living there. Like, black people would not do that. Like, people would not. If somebody's like, oh, uh, my neighbor got killed by a moose, all the black people are getting the fuck out of. Oh, moose are killing people now. We're getting the fuck out. Peace. I'm going to fucking Atlanta.
Where it's safe.
Shit, where moose don't kill people. You don't have to worry about fucking moose attacks.
Man, so
Oh,
speaking of
you
Atlanta,
talking about Australia? That's why a bunch of black people ain't going to fucking Australia.
oh yeah,
Like,
dude,
you can get. You put your foot in your shoe. There's some fucking shit that could kill you. Oh, black people ain't going there voluntarily. No, no, I'm not going to fucking Australia where there's just random shit that can kill you because it's there. I'm not going there. I'm going elsewhere because I don't want to die
I mean
from no fucking.
there are jungles in Africa still where everything's not trying to kill you.
But
And
guess what? The
there's
people sleep in fucking bug nets.
yeah, because you'll get malaria.
Yeah. They're not out just like, oh, I'm camping in the fucking wild and no, they're in a place where they got bug nets and fucking, as much medication as possible, accessible, not not because they want to, but that's where they have been. Which again, it's like they're not moving there. That's where they've been. There's a
Yeah,
difference.
no, it's true. Like I remember reading that like people who go to Africa on like African safaris, if at any point they get in the water, they pretty much are guaranteed to have to go through a course of like dewormer because the water is
Oh,
just fucking horrible. Like like even the streams that run through areas, you don't get in the water. It's dangerous. Really dangerous. But speaking of Atlanta and more Georgia at large, I found this YouTube channel which is like Georgia State Boys or something like that. And it's just high. It's almost all high speed chases. Like some idiot in their BMW decides they're gonna go the full 155 miles an hour that their vehicle is limited at, and get chased down by a Charger. Or they're gonna, it's a Mustang that has a supercharger. They can go like 170 plus miles an hour, and they catch it because the guy was an idiot and crashed the vehicle into a storage facility next to a Sonic. And or like just like the most intense high speed driving that I've found on the internet so far. And they do pit maneuvers. They get real mad when they catch the guy, of course, the driver. But there was another one that I saw the other day where it was like downtown, not downtown, just like on the edge of Atlanta, still Atlanta proper, where some guys had taken over the intersection, were doing like donuts and stuff like that. And a police cruiser comes out of nowhere and chases the vehicle and pits it so hard, just like completely pits it, and then jumps out and, weapons drawn, just yelling. The crowd's just standing there. I mean, the guy in the operator of the truck, they're trying to get away, hit like three pedestrians. I guess they're like jaywalkers, they're in the middle of the street, but hit three human beings with a truck. And man, the Atlanta police don't fuck around.
Yeah,
Like
they don't have time.
they chase people down. They have pursuit vehicles that'll go 150 plus miles an hour. Their patrol cars have like the bull bars on the full bull bar, so that they can just plow into full size trucks and not worry about it. Like they are not messing around at all. And it was kind of cool. It's like, yeah, that's like nice to see that they don't take any gunk, but it's also 150-mile-an-hour police cruiser is dangerous as all else. That's as dangerous as the vehicle they're pursuing. And it's thrilling to watch because where else I'm never going to drive a car 150 miles an hour on an interstate in traffic because I'm not insane. Like, I mean, maybe if Doctor Strange was like, oh, I'm going to give you this enchantment so nobody will get hurt, then I might consider it. But that's like cartoon fantasy, and I know that's not going to happen. I would actually totally consider it if there was some like enchanted thing that would make it so I could like navigate at high speeds and nobody would get injured anywhere within like 1,000-mile radius of me. I could deal with that. But if that was the case, what?
Well, and the issue is like once you start going above a certain speed, think vehicles start doing weird shit, and
Oh yeah, and the survivability
um,
threshold starts to drop rapidly.
yeah, yeah. So it's like unless you're like in the salt flats, going that fast is not it's not really feasible,
Oh, it's so terrifying when
especially
they have
like
to when the cruisers like take to the shoulder to go around something and they're still maintaining like 120, 130 miles an hour on the shoulder.
just imagine hitting a fucking pothole at 120 miles an hour.
Ugh.
Like, not, if it's small enough, you're just going to go over it and not even, but I'm talking about one that's big enough where you're going to hit it, where I'm like,
Something
you
big enough
know,
to swallow the tire, like a
yeah,
real
where
pothole.
that shit is going to, that would cause the car to damn near disintegrate.
Yeah, like catastrophic disassembly,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
catastrophic rapid disassembly.
Yeah. Because that could easily happen in Indianapolis in terms of coming upon a road
Man, that could happen on
or
some
like a
of
highway. I
that could
mean,
that could
that,
happen on some of the on or off ramps if someone's just driving the speed limit.
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. But I've been on Indianapolis highways and had big enough potholes where I had to like go around them. Um, depending on the time of year, they just don't get, they haven't had the chance to hit everything yet.
Yeah.
So it may be like a pothole on its worst day, and it's gonna be unattended, and Like, yeah, avoiding it at a regular speed is difficult, let alone when you're going 120 miles an hour. So that's where I'm like, you know, the idea of hitting excessive speeds on roads that haven't been freshly maintained, it's just that's stupid in the first place, let alone throw in actual other cars on the road. Like the single car going that fast and the road itself need to be in fucking perfect condition for some catastrophic shit not to happen at that speed. Um, and that's where again, like I've just not just, it's not just me, but I feel like there's a reason those types of vehicles are like classed as hypercars in terms of like you got to get something hyper to even start thinking about going that fast anyway,
Yeah.
let alone maintaining that speed.
I watched this video. A guy took his legit like muscle car, supercharged big stack muscle car to an open track day, and the vast majority of vehicles on the road that day were like Honda Civics. It was almost all Civics. There were a few Miatas, a few BMWs, but almost all Civics. And they were all fast, as fast as each other relatively. They weren't none of them were really overtaking each other, except for this muscle car. And like on straightaways, it was just as fast as all get out. And then when it took it off the released the fuel dump valve thing that they floor every time, it would just coast around the corners and faster than most of most of the Civics. And there was one, I think it was a BMW station wagon that was actually keeping up with it through the corners, but not in the straightaways. And it was really kind of interesting. It's like, here's a car that they can't power through the corners because it'll just like fly off the road. But on straightaways, well, no, but if they just let it coast through the corners, it held just fine. And on the straightaways, it had so much juice that it wouldn't even be racing these other cars because they were all driving like, get the hot lap time. And here's this dude in a giant fucking car just motoring around everything with like an obscene amount of power. And it was really interesting the first time to see it just cruise around everything. But after a while, it was just kind of boring because they couldn't actually open it up because none of the straightaways were long enough for it to actually get you know really wind up those gears and get those tires really spinning because I have no doubt that thing would go 200 miles an hour, but at no point was it allowed to. And so, like, part of me is like, maybe it's like the context is wrong. Maybe that vehicle just shouldn't race on a small track because it just can't. It's like all in first and second gear. Maybe that's just like the wrong track for it entirely. And so similarly to like driving on open roads, there's a time and place. Maybe some vehicles are just completely inappropriate for certain roads. Not even considering conditions. I'm assuming like perfect driving conditions, no inclement weather, no temperature threshold issues with tires. Uh, all maintenance and fluid levels are perfect. That kind of stuff. I'm not sure there's actually a place on the road for a vehicle that its only point is to go like stupid fast in a straight line and essentially endanger property.
Yeah, not really.
Because we can say like, oh, these are new tires, they're fucking great, they've got 50,000, 60,000, 90,000 mile tread life warranty, whatever. Like, we can't control the nail that falls off the back of some dude's utility truck. That it's not gonna just explode. It might not explode immediately. It might just take the nail and drive for a while and get like beat up the inside of the rim and then eventually plow. the pumping action of the nail causes the tire to delaminate and some other really wild things. And there's a whole list of potential outcomes that can happen from punctures in tires, especially when vehicles are capable of putting down the power, and that usually translates as heat, like directly at the rubber.
That's a
And
good point.
I never thought of that like as being as big of a time bomb as it actually is. But I'm also not driving around like a lunatic.
Well, but I think that's also why like semi tires probably explode more frequently because they have more pressure in
Oh
terms of
yeah,
like,
like
what if it's weight or speed, um, that heat friction or friction that causes the heat is like there's only certain levels that it can go and not break down, which is why they like switch to tires frequently during races. Like
yeah.
it'd be wild if they did the Indy 500 on one set of tires. Like I don't even know if that would be possible.
Man, so back in the Gran Turismo days, I did one of those endurance races. Like you can do I think they're like the 24-hour race is really like a 4-hour race. But I remember doing, I think one of them is actually like a 12-hour race or an 8-hour race. It was one really excruciatingly long
I
one
know
that I,
there's one that's definitely like 14 hours or something,
yeah, I think that might be the Le
or
Mans
double
track or
digits.
whatever. I know I did one that was like excruciatingly long, and we had to pause the game and take breaks because it was just like, too much. But I remember doing this on like the endurance races, and they were fun because you have to do it for a long time, and you got to like really commit. And I remember one time I forgot to go in to get pit, and I was just kept driving around. My wheels started turning red, and then I couldn't go around corners. And then that was like the object lesson. Oh yeah, it's like you got to change your tires regularly in these things. It's actually a factor in the endurance race version of that game. And I really liked it. I liked that detail a lot once I realized that it was a thing. Because when you're only doing 3 laps, you don't have to change tires. When you do like 120 laps, you definitely have to change tires. And
Oh
so
yeah.
that was a really good game early on, even before the graphics got amazing. I
Well,
think,
those endurance races were kind of game changing in terms of like they hadn't nobody really done that in racing before.
yeah,
In racing games rather. Obviously in real life that's what they're basing on, but
yeah, yeah. Well,
to
that
have that kind of game mode was definitely game changer.
I think that the brilliance of that stuff was that you had to commit. You could leave your PlayStation on pause and walk away from it, but you're risking your mom coming into your room and turning that thing off. And then what? Then you just lost, 2 to 4 to 8 hours of endurance race. Oh. Or if it's plugged into like anything and the power goes out, man. I think that was like the first game that made you get like that took getting a license really seriously. You had to have all the different licenses just to drive different cars at different levels. That was actually a really good thing, and it kept the riffraff out. Couldn't just like go into the game and buy the biggest, fastest, nastiest TVR Speed 12 and unleash it upon a field of Civics. You actually had to drive a Civic or equally classed vehicle. And you couldn't even drive anything faster than that until you like demonstrated capacity to pass the next license test or aptitude. It's a really smart game.
I feel like that's more common now.
Yeah,
But it definitely wasn't before.
man, That game did
for
a lot
sure.
of things right. Wait, there's a Neil
Well,
Blomkamp movie out about it, about the Gran Turismo player who transitioned into racing real cars. I haven't seen it. I have every expectation that it's like terrible.
didn't they make a? I thought they made a manga about him too. Or
I think that's what Blomkamp named based his movie off of.
'cause I thought it was after a real person.
I thought the manga was based off of a real person too.
Yeah. Or no, he was a delivery driver, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the movie is inspired by the real life journey of Jan Mardenborough.
Well,
Okay, I guess I'm gonna have to watch
wait,
this
I thought.
movie.
Oh, there must be a different one than I'm thinking of because I thought it was a Japanese dude
Oh,
that the manga was based off. He like had like a Skyline GT or something. I forget what the car was, but
there are quite a few mangas that are all about cars. So I don't know. I don't think I can actually any anime or manga with GT in it, you end up with Dragon Ball now.
okay, it's Drift King. I think it was a real person who was like a delivery driver. And Initial D is the manga that's based off of him or based on his story.
Oh, Keiichi Tsuchiyaka. Wait, Tsuchiya? Yeah. Oh, I've seen plenty of footage of this guy driving cars around things that seem impossible.
This makes sense. This makes more sense. Now, his shit happened in the 90s and the manga series happened in the 90s, which then is like the precursor to I don't know if you remember Tokyo Midnight Club Racing.
Oh yeah,
So they
that was like a
had
Need for
this like
Speed game, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
then they also had the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. So there was this period where like Tokyo Drift Racing was new and they were trying to introduce it and like nobody was drifting. And they definitely originated this style of like racing as like a competition. So this shit 1,000% originated in Japan as like a form of competition and then spread everywhere else. And now drifting is just like
That stuff
normal.
cracks me up though, because they're not going very well. They're going fast enough to break contact with the rear end, but like sometimes those cars are going really, I mean, relatively slow for what a track could actually do, and sometimes they're just like flying around sideways. It's hilarious to watch it. Like
Right.
there's like a guy who drives the drift van. That dude cracks me up too. It's amazing sometimes. It's like the most technical version of a rally track for the whole race course. But it's all streets. It's not like no gravel, no dirt. This stuff's amazing though.
Yeah, it's like it's amazing what can be done with a car, but I hate racing, like the idea of drift racing to me. And it's like it's one of those things like gymnastics where I'm like,
Well, that's why like was it
gymnastics
Ken
is
Block?
cool.
Ken Block and his Gymkhana series. That stuff was really cool because it was
Mhm.
vehicular gymnastics, but you know, eventually everyone
But the idea of a
succumbs.
competition to me is like, oh, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Like I could watch people do gymnastics, but I don't give a fuck who's better at gymnastics. Like this shit I don't care. But like, yeah, I could watch drifting all day, but I don't give a fuck who's like getting through the course faster. And that's where to me again, it's like, you know, because it's so restrictive on how you're using the vehicle, like it's not the same as just racing through a track, where racing through a track has some interesting aspect of who can do it faster, but like who can drift a course faster, I don't fucking care. Like I
Yeah, and
really,
like how do we actually award style points when it's completely subjective? Like what
yeah,
constitutes style? How are style points quantified in a meaningful way that translates to other people? Because Ken Block in his Gymkhana series, from that one might assume that he's like the greatest stunt driver to ever get behind the wheel, but when he got behind the wheel in rally racing, he did not do as well as anticipated. And he was good. Got Rookie of the Year, I think, his first year, but he wasn't like he wasn't like Tiger Woods who appeared and just demolished everyone. But in terms of stunt driving or these Gymkhana videos, I don't think I've seen anyone do anything like that outside of like the best parts of Jackie Chan movies when he's getting chased by somebody and they're driving rally cars. But I think Ken Block might have done it better. Those Jackie Chan chase scenes were pretty good. Ken Block totally should have been driving cars for Jackie Chan's movies.
well, and I think that's where like, yeah, that type of driving belongs in that type of movie. Whereas, like,
Oh
did you ever
wow.
see Days of Thunder?
Yeah.
That shit was stupid to me
Yeah.
because then it's like a a
Oh, so
movie
Jackie
like
Chan does his own stunt driving.
interesting. I mean, I don't know why we didn't expect it,
I
but
should have expected that.
I feel like a few actors do their own stunt driving.
Nick Cage does.
Yeah,
Tom Cruise
uh,
does. There's only a few.
yeah.
What's the God, I just watched that stupid
Well, but some
Ahsoka
of them
show.
they don't even let anybody drive,
Yeah.
and it's like completely done on a trailer, and the shots are like all fabricated. But yeah, it's like interesting to see how far stunt safety has come uh, because of like terrible accidents and shit. But obviously, uh, it doesn't solve everything. But it's wild. Alec Baldwin just killed somebody. Like,
Yeah. That happened. And
yeah,
apparently,
it's almost like that shit didn't even happen. The way people just moved on, and like because he didn't get found guilty of like manslaughter, people just moving on with their lives, I guess. But that motherfucker killed somebody.
so I just typed Alec Baldwin killed and Google entered Brandon Lee as a suggestion.
Oh God.
And this Google AI shit's gotta they gotta stop this crap. I'm grateful that they showed me that bodybuilder versus crossbow video. That was kind of unexpectedly cool and really like extremely entertaining. But I know that Alec Baldwin did not kill Brandon Lee. So why would Google suggest something like that? Let's
Well, and the
see.
way that Brandon Lee died is similar, but it's not the same as the way that
Yeah, there was an actual live round in the
Hutchins died.
firearm that,
Yeah.
that Alec Baldwin uh, discharged negligently. I guess. Oh, it's hard to describe because he was told to do it.
Well, but he was like the producer, so it was his responsibility anyway.
Yeah.
Like so he's responsible no matter how you slice it. Like even though somebody told him to pull the trigger, He was the producer responsible for the arms handler.
Man, it would have been so much better if he'd have just pointed it directly into the camera. So much better. Maybe not. Maybe there was one of those cameras that people hold directly in front of their chest, in which case it would have been so much. It could have been just as bad.
I mean, yeah, I feel like the camera would have possibly caught it, and yeah, caught most of the force if that would have happened. But who
And if it was the
knows,
kind
man?
that's on like some kind of dolly, then nobody would have been behind it. Then
Right at all. Um,
because they've got those crazy ass crane dolly systems that they use to make them movies, so they can those impossible shots that drive us like baddies. Like, how did they get that crazy shot? Then you find out they had a freaking crane
or a drone
or
for
a
that matter.
drone.
'Cause,
Yeah,
yeah, those are definitely being used. Um, get like establishing shots and shit.
yeah. I've always wanted to have a cherry picker truck with like a boom arm that would get me 40 feet off the ground, so I could just take pictures of whatever from absurdly high angles. And then I found out that it costs a heck of a lot to just to purchase one that's in working order, and that kind of ended my desire to have a cherry picker or a bucket truck.
Well, I bet the maintenance on those things is insane.
You have to use them all the time,
Yeah,
otherwise they start to break down.
yeah.
There has to be a business model attached to owning one. Otherwise, it's like, man, that's like an extreme luxury to own a bucket truck without being like an electrician or an installer of some kind. Yeah, 35,000 on the used end, all the way up to $500,000. Oh no, that's for a used bucket truck. $500,000. See,
Jeez.
uh, you got to make about you have to make about $1,000 a day. Um, or it costs about $650 a day to rent a bucket truck with an operator. So that thing's got to be making a lot of money. Otherwise, oh wow. Oh, those are for big buckets. Those are like 60-foot beams. Here we go. $72,000. $22,000. 94 bucket truck. $1,500. It looks beat up though. That's okay. I have no idea how much it would actually cost to maintain something like that. That's one of the other reasons where it's like, yeah, it's like a nice like fantasy daydream type thing, but
Well, but it also makes me wonder, like, who decides to get into building bucket trucks? Like that has to be not just that, but there's like this segment of utility vehicles or like utility equipment where I'm like, who's motherfucker that decided like I'm gonna make a bulldozer? Like and I don't mean like the individual, but like who is this person who's like one day like, oh man, you know what we need is this motorized vehicle with a big fucking shovel on the front. That's exactly what everybody needs. And then it turns into like a tool or heavy machinery that now you can't go to a construction site without it. So that's where I'm like, there's this element of innovation and also need for innovation where I'm like, you had to be on a lot of construction sites or something to even start conceiving of a bulldozer or like an earth mover or like who's the motherfucker that's never worked on a site that conceives of that, like, it doesn't necessarily have like there's this intersection where I'm again it's like what was that person's mindset, like what brought them to that point? And that's where to me there's like all these random things in society that we use like and take them for granted, like a fucking crane, man. Every time I see a crane I'm just like, what the fuck was somebody thinking when they built the first fucking crane? Because that shit, it still doesn't look structurally stable to me, even though the ones that they like
I know how it happens. Like,
they
hey
are.
guys, we got to get this really heavy thing up on top of this building here, and there are no trees that we can lift it up from. Well, why don't we just hoist it up from the
But why didn't
building?
somebody say, you know what, let's not do that? You know what I'm
Because
saying? Because there's like this element of you'll see skyscrapers, and then there's like a skyscraper being built, and then there's a crane on top of a skyscraper building another part of the skyscraper. And you're like, why are we here? What made a person say, I need to do something, I need to build a structure that necessitates building a minor structure on top of that structure that allows me to move other pieces of the supplemental structure to make it whole just to get to a point where an earthquake might bring it down
I mean, maybe
because we forgot to do this one thing
they're building
and
a
make the
pedestal for a
structure.
crane. It's real. The building exists to support the crane at that point, right?
It has to. At least the infrastructure for the building. Because if you look at images of like the Empire State Building being built, that's when you have all the fucking I won't call them jackasses, but all of the like super unsafe construction workers just hanging out on the like scaffolding, eating their lunch and shit. Like, oh, I'm a man, I'm gonna eat my lunch on a fucking steel beam with no safety wire. Like, they weren't dumb, they just really had no choice.
Yeah,
Like
OSHA
the
didn't
of
exist back then.
course, so that's where I'm like, those guys, it wasn't really a choice for them. So they weren't dumb. They just had no choice but to be that bold. So, but if you look at those images, that's where I'm like, again, there's like a crane on top of a 90-story structure or some shit where they had to probably put the crane pieces on an elevator, haul them up there, and then build the crane 90 stories up. I don't know however the fuck they did it, but that's where I'm like,
Yeah, 1970.
why, why would someone look at that process and be like, you know what, this is too fucking dangerous. It's not. But the outcome is so romantic as an idea that they can't say no. Where there's too many of those things in society where I look at it and I'm like, is it worth it? Like a battleship. Who was the first person to think, oh, let me get a bunch of fucking steel and try to make it float and then put some more steel objects in these things to get weapons in there so
To
we
make
can like
other ships
sail somewhere
unfloat.
and deploy. Yeah. And it's like it's basically a floating
Weapons platform.
or a floating skyscraper on the side, whatever, in terms of that much volume of
Oh, just yeah, the amount of
structure,
steel.
just yeah, in terms of like that thing being a single entity, then being deployed into the ocean
Man, like
as
aircraft carriers
something.
are described as cities on water.
Basically, yeah,
They've got
that's
so
basically
much
what they
physical
are.
infrastructure because of the amount of space they need to contain all of those aircraft and all of the fuel and all of the ordnance and all of the support staff and all of the food that they're going to eat.
So,
Unfortunately, they're nuclear powered, so they don't have to consume fuel to move around, but airplanes are thirsty.
but on that, that's where I wonder if we've hit peak megastructure, um, and that's where now the discussions on like 15-minute cities and shit like that because the skyscrapers don't make any sense. Like that shit in the I forget if it's UAE where they're
Oh, the
building
line.
yeah, like that feels to me like the peak mega structure. Uh I I would assume,
Well, if it's
but
done right, then all of the resources should be distributed and accessible of every like 3 blocks. And so one might have their entire life within like a 10 block range and never travel from one end of the line to the other because they really wouldn't need to.
mhm,
And so on some level, it's kind of like that's actually just taking a skyscraper and putting it on its side.
yeah.
That's actually kind of cool. It's just extra big. It's, even bigger than a skyscraper. It's like 10 skyscrapers or 100 skyscrapers all on their sides. But that's just a really big city built sideways in one strip. Oh man, getting and like the I can just see that being a real hassle too. And getting transferred, you got to just sit on a platform and coast along for miles until you get to a new place that looks just like the place you just left. It sounds like some kind of dystopian future brewing in the Middle East.
Yes, this is exactly like the dystopian future that every goddamn science fiction story warned us about, which is why, like, in all of those warnings, it also makes me feel like there is. Uh, it, it's a sign to me that that is unsustainable. Like the the line is effectively just a miniature version of uh what is it, the terrarium. I forget what the fuck they called it in Foundation. It's like a big ring around the planet that's inhabited. But it's the
Oh,
same, it's just a smaller version of that. And that shit ends up getting destroyed in the story because it represents, like, to the terrorists, it represents the most easily attackable point where all it took was like one bomb to take down the entire fucking thing, just in the right place. So that's why it was even mentioned in all of Empire as like the thing as a target because it's such a piece of a grand work of opulence, but also so easily destroyed that they didn't think anybody would ever do it, which was why the security was so lax around it. So like there's all these lessons in that story that would make it so that you would think a society that is able to produce that story also doesn't move to those types of megastructures eventually, or the lessons of that story would eventually hopefully avert that society, not just that story but those types, from trying to intersect with the dystopia. So that's where on the one hand, like, all the people who enjoy sci-fi, it's not because they want dystopian futures, it's because a lot of them use dystopian futures as escapism from the problems we have now, but not because they want those dystopian futures to happen. So I think that's where looking at a future that's dystopian from a position of like, oh, we can avoid this dystopian disaster. So let's extrapolate what it would look like if we didn't, as a means to prod people to start trying to avoid that. That's why I feel like the mega structures are
Man,
not our destiny,
what sucks
because a
is,
lot of the stories are about them being negative.
but it seems like so much of what's happening now, it's like people are totally cool with the idea of living in one of the mega cities.
But that's because not enough of them understand
Like what that actually
what
means.
mega cities represent in cyberpunk's
Yeah.
like framework. And I didn't truly understand it because it's subtle. So like
It's
reading
terrifying.
no, it's not terrifying if you unless you're like a hardcore nationalist. So like reading the introduction to Neuromancer, that like I had never read the intro, and hearing William Gibson being able to retroactively put Neuromancer into a different context, what he points out is that the subtle thing he did is placing the story in New Tokyo. He does not allude to the breakdown of the United States, but it happened. So, in corporate entities and megacities replacing nation states, it's the setting, but because he doesn't explicitly point to the breakdown of the United States of America as a nation state, it's only in the back of our minds as something that must have happened, and we just like go along with it instead of like actually considering what that context means in the framework of this cyberpunk world where megacities are the new paradigm. And that's where it's like, I think we had discussed, megacities are unsustainable the first time natural disaster hits, that megacities fucking wiped out if there's no supplemental aid that is not situated in that megacity, which is where nation states come in as a superlative force of supporting the nation's or the city state, um, and the state supporting the city. So there's like all of these supportive frameworks to ensure that at the end of the day, the federal government is meant to make sure that the smallest city doesn't get wiped out when if the federal government can help it or not. And that's where like that thing being pointed out in the introduction was like, oh fuck, I didn't notice that. Like if you go back and watch Blade Runner, you don't fucking notice it. Anytime these cyberpunk stories are being told, you don't notice it. So I think on the one hand, it's easy to like take these stories at the surface level, but then there's some shit that if you don't really think about it, it might go unnoticed for decades, and it takes the fucking creator of that thing to come and point it out to finally be like, oh, that's what he actually or she actually meant in that message. And I think that's where, on the one hand, a lot of the science fiction that we've had hasn't really been put into the proper context. So that's where you can get these fucking idiots who are like, Star Wars isn't political. You know what I mean? Those fucking idiots are out there. But it's only because none of them got to see that George Lucas had a black wife and wasn't trying to feed into like white supremacist incel views. And that like once you get it, then you can understand that, yeah, Star Wars was always political, but you can understand how someone got to this notion of thinking in their dumb head that it wasn't.
I mean, these are probably people who don't understand that Magnificent Seven was a remake.
Yes. Or Scarface for that matter.
Or Scarface. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional